Hey y'all, welcome back. Today we're checking out the weird reasons these 7 songs were banned by the BBC.
Let's start the list with The Who's My Generation. It was banned by the BBC when it came out.
Why?
Now, My Generation became a soundtrack for mid-60s youth rebellion. Like The Smiths' How Soon Is Now in the 80s or Pulp's Common People in the 90s, My Generation became a song that perfectly encapsulated the youthful spirit of its time. Story goes that Pete Townshend wrote this song while riding on a train, with one story suggesting he was inspired by the Queen Mother, that's the wife of King George VI. She allegedly had Townshend's 1935 Packard hearse towed off a street in Belgravia because she was offended by its presence during her daily drive through the neighbourhood. In a 1985 interview with Rolling Stone, Townshend explained that My Generation was very much about trying to find a place in society. And it was initially banned by the BBC, not for the implied swear word in the song, and it wasn't because of The Who's archaic reputation of violently destroying their instruments. It was actually banned because the BBC were worried that it might offend people with stutters. There are a few accounts floating around as to why Daltrey stutters in the song. Some say he couldn't hear himself in the monitors during the recording of the song. Some say he did it by accident and it just stuck. And some say he was mimicking the stutters of drug users of that time. By the time the single had sold 300,000 copies and other radio stations were playing it regularly, the BBC lifted its ban.
Hang on, the BBC bans a lot of stuff, doesn't it? Don't they? I feel like getting your song banned by the BBC is a key to success. What was this car thing? She had a car towed?
She allegedly had Townshend's 1935 Packard hearse towed off a street in Belgravia because she was offended by its presence during her daily drive through the neighbourhood.
Oh, so Pete Townshend owned a hearse. Pretty funny. And he parked it on the street. And this lady was offended by it.
By the Queen Mother, that's the wife of King George VI.
The Queen Mother. Is that Queen Elizabeth's mom? Right? Okay, yeah, I know who she is. Or, I've heard of her. I've never met her. I think she's dead now. Hearse. Death. Okay.
Next, God Save the Queen by Sex Pistols.
Oh, that's no surprise.
Now, this song was a harsh critique of the monarchy and the established political system that it symbolised. It declared that the Queen ain't no human being, and that people had no future, and that the UK was a fascist regime. Now, the release of this record, timed perfectly with the Silver Jubilee, seemed to be a direct challenge to the love of the monarchy at the time. Within days, the BBC swiftly imposed a complete ban on its airplay across both radio and television. BBC Radio 2 controller at the time, Charles McLeland, called the song gross bad taste, while Labour MP Marcus Lipton condemned it, stating, "If pop music is going to be used to destroy our established institutions, then it ought to be destroyed first." And many stores, including the popular high street shop Woolworths, simply refused to stock it. Sex Pistols were part of a punk movement that was rapidly gaining momentum in the UK during the mid-1970s, a time when the country was facing economic stagnation, rising unemployment, power blackouts, and growing racial tensions. Now, you've got to understand that in the 70s, the BBC was squeaky clean, family-friendly, and the punk movement was, well, it was sort of scaring their elderly audience. They weren't really sure what was happening, so they wanted to get to the bottom of it. And to do this, they invited Malcolm McLaren, the band's manager, and Johnny Rotten onto their nationwide program, basically to grill them about how their music was making kids of that generation violent.
Well, your following has got a reputation for being rather dangerous. A lot of accidents have happened. How do you feel about this?
Honest reactions, really, in the audience itself. I mean, God, you know, if a few glasses fly around an audience, that isn't so bad. It's perhaps a lot better than kids sitting down doing nothing and twiddling their thumbs. You know, there's a lot of people out there, a lot of established people, a lot of people who hate the Sex Pistols, certainly in the established music business. Certainly regarding people who promote venues, we have a lot of problems getting to the kids. We'll eventually make it. It doesn't matter what they think, because basically it's that kid in the street. It's what he likes. He will change public opinion. It won't be the journalists, and it won't really be the music industry. It will be the kid on the street, because he's the guy who buys the record.
Does it matter if the record doesn't sell?
There's no question it will sell.
Arguably, though, the BBC banning
I love this. I love whenever journalists think musicians are dumb and they think they can get them, you know? Gotcha questions. And then the musician just lays some truth down. People think rock stars are dumb, and most of them are not. This was very well said. I love the Twisted Sister guy, what's his name? Forgotten his name. D. Snyder. Yeah, he went before Congress and talked about censorship. And he made all the Congress people look like idiots. I love that. I think this is happening here too. I love that. Way to go.
Music industry, it will be the kid on the street, because he's the guy who buys the record.
Does it matter if the record doesn't sell?
There's no question it will sell.
Arguably, though, the BBC banning this song actually contributed to its success.
Yeah.
It ignited a fire in the very audience that Sex Pistols were trying to reach.
It confirms the content of the song. You know? It's showing them that they're right.
Ignited a fire in the very audience that Sex Pistols were trying to reach. The record flew off shelves in the stores that did stock it, quickly climbing to number 2 on the charts. It was kept from the top spot by Rod Stewart's I Don't Want to Talk About It, despite the Pistols song being banned. And this sparked allegations that the charts had been manipulated to stop the song getting to number 1. Next up, David Bowie.
Oh, I bet it was. You know it was. Yeah, I don't even know that Rod Stewart song. Who remembers that? I've never heard it. Let's listen to it. Yeah, no one remembers that song. It's a crap song. I mean, no offense, but it's not God Save the Queen.
Being banned. And this sparked allegations that the charts had been manipulated to stop the song getting to number 1. Next up, David Bowie. Yes, David Bowie had one of his songs banned by the BBC. Let's go back to 1969. David Bowie is working on Space Oddity. Tony Visconti was initially offered the gig to produce the song, but he declined, as he thought it seemed like a cheap shot, aimed at capitalizing on the publicity surrounding the Apollo 11 mission, which was due to take place in July 1969. Now, the song was released on the 11th of July, 1969, and the Apollo mission started on the 16th of July, 1969, just 5 days after Space Oddity was released. The BBC refused to play the song until Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins had safely returned to Earth. Now, as someone who used to work as a radio presenter in the UK, I can totally see why they did this. You've got to be so careful with the songs that you're playing. For example, you probably don't want to play something like AC/DC's You Shook Me All Night Long if there's just been a big earthquake somewhere in the world. And of course, you'll remember if you're in the UK, when the Queen passed away, every single radio station was playing sad, somber songs. So it's really important to pick the songs you play carefully. So I can totally see why they did this. Once the embargo was lifted, the song climbed to number 5, and 6 years later it reached number 1 in the UK when RCA re-released it amid the height of Bowie mania.
Wow. That's actually a tasteful reason. Yeah. If they had put Space Oddity into their programming and then something happened to the astronauts, that would be in really poor taste. So that one kind of makes sense. I get it. I can't believe I'm saying that.
And now for a classic one. Everyone knows this story, but in case you don't, the Kinks' Lola, released in 1970.
I don't know
this was banned by the BBC. Now, just 3 years before this, the government passed the Sexual Offences Act in the UK. With Lola, Ray Davies tackled what might have been considered a taboo subject, where he sings about dancing and drinking champagne with either a cross-dressing man or perhaps a trans woman. Amazingly though, this wasn't the reason that the BBC banned it from its radio stations. See, in the original version of the song, Ray Davies sings the lyrics, "Where you drink champagne and it tastes just like Coca-Cola." C-O-L-A, cola. And at the
Oh.
time, the BBC had a strict no product placement policy, which meant they couldn't play the song because the brand Coca-Cola was mentioned. Now, when this decision was made, the Kinks were on tour in America, and Davies had to rush back to the UK to overdub the words.
Drink champagne and it tastes just like cherry cola.
Oh.
C-O-L-A, Coca-Cola.
Thankfully, this satisfied the BBC committee, and the ban was lifted.
I never heard that. That's a fun story. Excuse me. I kind of admire the BBC for this one, you know? Coca-Cola doesn't need free advertising. I'm on board with this. Way to go, BBC.
Next, in 1962, Massachusetts singer Bobby Pickett wrote Monster Mash as a playful spoof of the popular dance crazes of the era, like the twist and the mashed potato, in homage to the legendary horror actor Boris Karloff, whom he mimicked throughout the track. Despite its light-hearted nature, with lyrics like "It was a graveyard smash," the BBC found the song too dark and banned it for being too morbid. Yes, that was the official reason they banned it for 11 years. Too morbid. The ban actually worked in their favour though, because it added to the song's mystery over in the States, and it topped the Billboard chart in North America for Halloween in 1962. After the ban was lifted, the song was re-released in the UK in 1973 and became a top 5 hit.
I'm surprised at this one, because it's such an innocent song. It was morbid. What are the lyrics? I was working in the lab late one night when my eyes beheld an eerie sight from a monster from the slab began to rise, and suddenly to my surprise, he did the monster mash. It was a graveyard smash. It caught on in a flash. He did the monster mash from laboratory in the castle. Da, da, da. There's nothing morbid about these lyrics. It's basically telling the story of Frankenstein, except whenever Frankenstein gets up, they have a big dance party. And Dracula's there, and Wolfman is there. But they're just partying. They don't talk about death or anything. Took 11 years for the BBC to realize that, but at least they finally did, right?
Next, George Michael, I Want Your Sex, from 1987. Now, at the time, it was one of the few songs to feature the word sex in its title, leading the BBC to limit its airplay and video rotation, banning it before the watershed due to its overt sexual themes. Some critics claimed that the song was promoting casual sex at a time when AIDS was a growing concern. And with lyrics like "sex is natural, sex is good, not everybody does it, but everybody should," I can see why. However, George Michael clarified in a statement that I Want Your Sex was about connecting lust with love, rather than just with strangers. He later said in an interview with Jonathan Ross, "I wasn't expecting the blanket ban. I think it's unfair because it's the first ban of its kind in a long time. And I think that if I were not George Michael, then it would have no problem being played on those stations. And it's incredibly irritating having a record out for a couple of weeks and knowing that people haven't heard it."
I bet that helped the song though, George. I had that album. What was that, 1988? You know, when you're a little kid, you don't really know what your musical tastes are, or I didn't. I just kind of bought whatever was popular. And I had that album. I think it has that song Faith on it. And I remember when this song came on, I felt embarrassed. I didn't want my parents to hear me listening to this song. And I didn't like the song. I knew it was something I shouldn't have been listening to. There's things that you guess, and there are things that you know. There's boys that you can trust and girls that you don't. There's little things you hide and little things that you show. Sometimes you think you're going to get it, but you don't. And that's just the way it goes. I swear I won't tease you. I won't tell you no lies. Don't need no Bible. Just look at my eyes. I've waited so long, baby. Now that we're friends, every man's got his patience, and here's where my ends. Oh, yeah, I think George Michael's response to the band sounds like bullshit. Because these lyrics are just about wanting to have sex. Another song that creeped me out on that album was Father Figure. It sounded dirty, but I didn't really know what I was listening to, you know?
And finally, Blondie's song Atomic was banned by the BBC. Weirdly, by the time the BBC decided to ban it, the song had already been out for a decade and was already widely known. It had reached #1 in the United Kingdom years earlier. So Blondie no longer really needed the airtime at this point. But the track became one of many the BBC had to ban following the outbreak of the Gulf War in 1990. The BBC's decision was based on the interpretation of the song's title, which could be seen as a reference to a bomb. So the BBC felt it would be inappropriate to air the song alongside news bulletins about potential bombings. So understandably, it made sense at the time. But Blondie wasn't the only one who faced bans by the BBC around this time. A total of 67 songs were removed from the airwaves due to the conflict.
Wow.
Other tracks on the banned list included Cher's Bang Bang, My Baby Shot Me Down, and Lulu's Boom Banga Bang. Despite the title, Blondie had no intention of referencing warfare. Instead, the song used the word to add a futuristic element. Also considered potentially offensive during the Gulf War were Maria Muldaur's 1974 hit Midnight at the Oasis, as well as I'll Fly For You by Spandau Ballet and Everybody Wants to Rule the World by Tears for Fears. And there are actually loads more songs that were banned by the BBC, so let me know in the comments below if you want to see a part 2 to this video. In the meantime, click over there next and watch my video of 11 songs that eerily predicted the future. Spooky.
I gotta watch that one. Y'all be sure to go to Music Mongoose and like and subscribe. I don't remember that Blondie song. Blondie. Atomic. Yeah, I've never heard that before. Yeah, I expected these reasons for being banned would have stuff to do with sex and drugs. But only one of them had to do with sex. Wow. And I expected to have the feeling of, yeah, BBC, go f*** yourself. But some of them, actually, a couple of them, it makes sense. The David Bowie one and the Blondie one kind of makes sense. They don't want to take any risks, I guess. It's nice to know that the BBC has loosened their grip a bit. Well, y'all, I'd like to thank my patrons on Patreon. I'd like to thank my Buy Me a Coffee folks. Buy Me a Coffee folks. Thanks for watching this with me, and I'll see you next time. Later.